So, what happens when a kid gets in trouble at school in Nebraska? It's pretty complicated. That's why we're here. In this explainer, we're going to break down the whole system for you. Whether you're a parent trying to navigate this or an educator in the thick of it, by the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture of the rules, your rights, and how it all works.
Suspended, expelled, these are huge words, right? These are the kinds of decisions that can seriously impact a student's future. So the big question is, who makes that call and how? It's definitely not as straightforward as you might think, and it's absolutely crucial to understand the process. So let's dive in.
All right, first up, a patchwork of rules. And that's really the best way to describe it. See, you might think there's just one single rule book for every school in Nebraska, but that's not the case. It's actually a mix of state laws and local policies, and that creates this kind of patchwork system.
Okay, so here's how it breaks down. You've got two main layers. On one hand, you have state law, things like the Student Discipline Act. This sets the absolute basics, the musts, that every single school has to follow. Think of it as the foundation. But then your local school district gets to build on top of that. They're the ones who fill in all the specific details. What exactly is prohibited and what the consequences are. The state provides the skeleton and the local district adds the muscle. It really paints a clear picture.
So, let's talk about the discipline playbook. When something serious happens, a school can't just make a decision off the cuff. No way! They've got to follow a very specific set of rules. A playbook, really. That's all about making sure things are fair for everyone. Let's break down what's in it.
And at the absolute heart of this playbook is this really important legal concept called due process. It's a huge deal. What it boils down to is this: a student has the right to a fair process before any serious consequence is handed down. We're talking long-term suspension or expulsion. And this is key. It's not about proving guilt or innocence at this stage. It's about ensuring the procedure itself is fair and by the book.
So what does this due process actually look like? Well, it all kicks off with a formal written notice from the school. And I mean formal, not just a quick phone call. This piece of paper has to spell out exactly what the student is accused of and what the school is proposing as a penalty. Then, and this is so important, the family gets to ask for a formal hearing. This is their chance to review the case, present their side of the story. It's only after that whole process plays out that a final decision can be made.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit, because it's really important to get this. The system we've been talking about, it's not frozen in time. Not at all. Nebraska's whole approach to school discipline is changing, and there are some pretty big shifts on the horizon.
If you look at the recent policy talks happening in Nebraska, you can see a few clear trends emerging. First, there's a big push for more transparency. Basically, making schools report more data so everyone can see what's happening. They also want to give families more useful info and resources right when they get a discipline notice. But the two biggest changes, really, are a new focus on protecting the youngest students and a major effort to ensure equity by watching the data super closely for any unfair patterns. And this next one, it's a game changer. One of the biggest proposals out there would basically prohibit out-of-school suspensions for kids in pre-K all the way through second grade. The only exception would be for really serious situations, like if a weapon is involved. So think about that. For Nebraska's littlest learners, the whole conversation is shifting away from sending them home and toward finding solutions inside the school.
All right, so why all these changes? What's behind this big pivot away from old school punishment? Well, the answer is tied to a much, much bigger problem: simply keeping kids in school.
Just look at this number for a second. 21%. That's how many students in Nebraska are considered chronically absent. Let that sink in. That's more than 1 out of every 5 kids missing a huge amount of school. It's a pretty shocking statistic when you think about it.
And that brings us to a really critical question, right? When we suspend or expel a student, we are literally telling them not to come to school. So, is there a connection between those discipline policies and that giant absenteeism number we just saw? Well, policymakers are looking at that and saying absolutely yes.
And because of that connection, there's a huge push for schools to think beyond just punishment. The new focus is all about what are called restorative and supportive approaches. We're talking about things like counseling, mentoring, or working more closely with families. The goal here is pretty simple, actually. Address the behavior, for sure, but do it in a way that keeps the student in the classroom learning.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. But what does this all mean for you? Because whether you're a parent or an educator, you're not just a bystander here. You have a really important role to play. If you're a parent, the number one thing you can do is get ahead of the game.
Seriously, crack open your district's student handbook at the start of every school year. Look for these key things. Are the rules spelled out clearly? Do you get how the discipline process works, step by step? Does it tell you about your rights, like notice in a hearing? And does it talk about alternatives to suspension? Knowing this stuff before there's a problem is, without a doubt, your best strategy.
And for educators, it really comes down to a few key things: consistency and communication. It's about making sure rules are applied fairly to everyone, documenting what happens really carefully, and, so importantly, talking with families early and often. This can stop a small issue from snowballing into a huge one. It's all about recognizing that discipline isn't just about one kid in one classroom. It's tied to the much bigger picture of attendance, equity, and the entire school's climate.
So if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this quote. Nebraska student discipline policy in 2026 is best understood as a system in transition. That just nails it, doesn't it? This whole system is moving, it's evolving. Yes, serious consequences are still on the table, but the momentum, the real energy, is shifting toward approaches that are more supportive, more transparent, and more fair for all students.
And that really leaves us with the big, lingering question, doesn't it? As all these policies continue to change, the fundamental challenge is finding that balance. How can our schools build a discipline system that is truly fair for every single student, while also making sure it's effective in keeping our schools safe and focused on learning? That's the puzzle at the very heart of this whole transition.